Hey folks, this video is going to follow immediately from our last video, so if you haven't seen that, you need to go back and watch that, or else none of this is going to make any sense. If you did watch the last video, though, you might have something that looks like this, where we're making our Dropbox clone called Dripbox. And right now, all it does is it shows a password, and it's got this random number coming in from a background process that's filling in while keeping our UI completely usable, which was a neat trick. But we haven't actually fleshed this out at all. And since this is going to be like a Dropbox clone, we need to add in some functionality so that we can add in files that we want to share and then grab files that we want from other computers on our network. This is going to try and keep everything all synced up. So we're going to want to have ways of showing the status of our files and everything like that. But right now, all we have is this password thing, and the submit button doesn't actually do anything other than print out whatever is in the password. And our cancel button works, but we're going to need to add in a lot more. So let's do that. Before we do that, though, we need to kind of clean this up, because right now everything is just in our init file, and that's not very clean at all. We want to keep things tidy, and a good way of doing that is to set specific files for specific tasks. So like, let's say we want our background task to be in a background, and we'll just take our background function here out of our init and plug it in here. Now we're going to need to do all our imports for the things that it's dependent on, like random and async. Shit. And you know, so now the window that we're using is no longer usable, and we're defining the window up here in the base of our init. So we can address that by just importing the Dripbox, and we could do a from Dripbox, but in this case I'm just going to do Dripbox dot, and now we have that window. Oh, I just remember another thing that I wanted to show you guys. So I'll come back to that. So let's do the same thing now with our UI. We'll take the layout with us while we go and make a new file called GUI. And let's copy over the layout and the UI logic here. So once again, we're going to need to import things. We're going to import PySimpleGUI as SG, and we're going to import sys, because we're using sys.exit down here. And once again, import async IO, and import Dripbox so we can interact with the window. All right. Now we need to import those two functions now from their subfiles. So we do import Dripbox dot the file that we want to grab from. In this case, GUI. Or we want to from Dropbox GUI import UI. Yeah, just UI. And then from Dripbox background import background. So now that is working. This is all working except for this layout, because the layout now we've nested that inside of the GUI here. We could import it from there, but I want to show you a better way of doing this. As you get more and more complex in your layouts with this, there's going to be times when you need to clear out a window and make a new window. In fact, we're going to... Oh my god, as I'm recording this, I just saw an idiot fucking just backed his car into my house. God damn it. What's going on? And he's taking off. I'll deal with that later. As I was saying, so there's going to be times we're going to delete our window and make a new window. And if you make copies of windows and stuff, it's going to complain sometimes if the keys that you're using are already used in the new window, even though you're basically just trying to replace one window with the other, it's going to complain, well, yeah, we've already got a key named this, so I don't know what you want me to do here. I'm going to either, it's going to append a number to it, or it's just going to give you an error message. So the way that we can get around this is by creating new layout objects. So every time we ask for a layout, we're going to make a function that's going to create a layout. And it's going to have all the same data inside of it. Like, we're just grabbing this, plugging this in here, and returning layout. So the data is all the same, but because of the way that we're doing this with a function, like this layout is only defined inside of this function, it's instead of being like a global here. So every time we run the create layout, we get a new object called layout, and that's going to get us around any kind of problems. So let's import create layout, and then we can just plug that in here, and we should have basically what we were doing before. And we do. But there are a couple of things here I want to point out. So this error down here is saying that, you know, this is because it's trying to write this random number to that label, but that label didn't exist yet when the processes were firing off. So we can, like, it's just a warning, you can ignore this, but if you want to get rid of it, we can add states to this. So let's do that. We'll just add a state equals init, and let's see, in our UI, after we read the window, see that it's complaining that the window hasn't been read or finalized. Reading finalizes the window, so the window exists after we get to that point. We can call the DripboxState and assign it to ready. Okay, so now we've got a way of saying, here I'm initializing and here I'm actually ready, and we can put a check on this. So if basically just the DripboxState does not equal init, then go ahead and do this, and that should get rid of our error, and it does. Let me run it a few times just to make sure. Yeah, okay, so that's one little warning thing we got out of the way. Another thing I wanted to show you was actually something that somebody watching this had suggested. He had seen another video where somebody was saying that you can take these points in time where you're using async IO sleep and you're just giving it a really, really low value, because all we're saying here is, hold on a second, is there anything else to do? Like, that's all this line does. Hold on a second, is there anything else we want to do? And yes, there is another thing in this group of things that we're waiting to do that bounces it off to the background. And here in the background, I set it to sleep at 1 because I didn't want it to just constantly be spamming. There's no point in that. So I gave this a 1 second sleep. But for these times when you want it to just hang on a minute and you're not actually like too concerned about the time, you can actually set in 0 here. And to make this a more visual demonstration, I'll set both of these to 0. And it still works. Like right now, there's no delay at all, and the UI is still responsive. Like that's a really cool trick. So for future reference, let's use that. All right, I think I covered all the groundwork here, and now we're ready to actually get into building new stuff. So we need to actually flesh out this UI. So let's make the submit button do something here. When we do that by let's do a elif event equals, we're doing submit, print success. And we'll change this to an elif, because that's basically this is our handler for everything besides timeouts that we aren't already covering. Then we want it to print out the event and the values so we know what's happening. So right now, hitting the submit button is causing this to happen. So let's add code in here that's going to add in our main, like get past our login and get into our main. And like, we'll worry about the password and all the other stuff like that in the next video when we get into the database stuff. But for right now, we're just fleshing out the UI. So the submit button, we want to take us to a main layout. And you can't just add stuff to a window. So you've either got to have the stuff already there and hidden, or you need to destroy the window and make a new window. And in this case, it's going to be a little bit more efficient if we just have the stuff we need already built in. So let's do that. And to do that, we're going to have several layouts put into columns, which are put into panes. Think of them as panels. So we're going to have layout login, and we're going to have a layout main, and in here, remember, we're doing lists of lists, so this first row is just going to be a text that says main stuff goes here. And then we're also going to have a layout share, where we're going to be setting what files we want to share. Share stuff goes here. And now we've got these three different layouts. We can assign these into columns. So we're going to have a column for login, which is going to be SG column. And we just throw in the, you see it's asking for a layout here. So we're going to give it the layout for login. We're going to have another one for main. And a third one for our share. And now we need to take all of these columns and stuff them into a pane. So our pane is going to be, and once again, this needs to be a list of lists. SG pane, and now this is going to ask for a pane list, which is what our columns are. So we're going to make a new list here of column login, column main, and column share. And let's rename this to the layout, because I want this to be clear that this is the final layout. So this should work. It's going to be a mess, but it should work. And it does. So we got our main stuff panel and our share stuff panel, and we got our login panel as we've always had. We also got these slidey things here, handlebars, I guess. But we don't want it all to be showing up at once. So let's say that the visibility on this is false. So visible false. And the same with our share. We're setting visible to false. And now we're back to basically what we were having before, except we've now got this kind of risen thing here. We can get rid of that too. In our pane declaration here, that is the relief. And we're going to call into the PySimpleGUI module, where it's going to have a bunch of different types of relief, and we want the relief flat to make it flat. So yay, now it looks basically like what we had before we started screwing around with all these panes, but now we've got all these hidden panes that we can immediately replace and swap panes around with. So let's do that. Let's change our success logic here to well, let's call into the Dripbox window, and we want to we want to give all these things names. So let's call this the key. Login pane, or panel login panel main, and key panel share. So now we can say, okay, panel login, we're going to update you so that your visibility or visible is now false, and the panel main, we want to update this to be visible true. Let's see if that works. And it does. So we got our main stuff goes here. Now, we're probably going to need it to do something useful. So let's go back here and actually start editing this. We do want a text thing here, which is going to be our status. To keep this from being confusing, let's make this our, what I want this to basically say is whether or not you're online or not. So let's default it to say online. And we'll call this connection status. And to prevent any possible confusion, I'm changing the login status to login status. And I'm making sure that our random number thing is shooting that now at login status. And on that same row, let's have a button for our share. And this is not going to look good because it's squishing everything together. It's turning that into a very small window here because we're not giving it any kind of sizing. So let's give it some sizing here. We'll say that the size of this text box should be, and we're using a tuple here, of 75 characters long and only 1 character high. And that should look a lot better, give us more room. Yay, we got lots more room. All right. Now let's make the share button do something. So if we come down here to where we have our UI logic, say elif event equals share. Now we want to make the panel main hide visible false, and we want to make the panel share visible true. Yay! All right, it's all working. So, let's now build this up. So what we want here is a file browser, so we can pick what files we want to share. So let's change this to select the file you would like to share. And in the next row, we'll have a input box with nothing's default, and we'll give this a key of new share. And next to that, we're going to have a file browser. And you'll see that PySimpleGUI has all these built in for us already, so we don't have to build our own file browser. It's very convenient. And we're going to be making use of an interesting trick here. Let me make sure that all this is working first. All right, so yeah, we're getting our new window here, or our new panel showing up. And when I pick an object here, or a file, it automatically populated into this. And I double tapped so it went into the background there. But you see, it automatically populated our input. That's the important thing here. And we didn't tell it what to do that, right? And the way that it's doing that is it basically looks on the row that it's at for the previous object and checks to see if it can stuff itself there. If we put this on another row, that won't work. See, it doesn't work. Now, if you do, for some reason, want to have your file browser button on a separate row, you need to target it to the input you want to show that selected file, if that's what you want to do. And that should work now. Success! All right. But for this, I'll put this back up here. And now below that, we'll have another text that's going to be like a share status in case there's any kind of problems with the file. And then below that, another row of buttons. And we want to confirm that they want to submit the file as it's shown here. And we want to give them an option to say that they don't actually want to do that. And the best verb for that is cancel. But we're already using cancel up here. So let's change these top ones from submit to connect and cancel to quit. And make sure that we are now updating the places that's used. All right. This should all work. Yay, okay, so our quit quits. Our connect connects. And our share is working as intended. So now we need to add in our confirm and cancel logic. So let's now do that. We'll do the cancel first because this is going to be really easy. It's basically the opposite of when we hit the share button. So we'll say elif event equals cancel. We make the main panel visible and the share panel not visible. And so we're going to do the same exact thing. If you do confirm, we don't need those panels up anymore. But we want to save the thing that has been submitted. We want this this new share here. Like we want to save that somehow. So let's stuff that into an empty list. We'll call shares. I'm trying to make sure I got everything in the right place. I want to put these above the window just in case I start to run into any problems later, where I'm calling this CreateLayout, and it's, yeah, the CreateLayout is going to later be using the shares thing, so we want to make sure that that's above this. So let's stuff the result of our value new share. Or actually, we want to append this value to the shares. And to keep this neat, I'm going to actually do this in a dict. So we'll call this file name. And then we won't use this in this video, but we will later. We're going to need to keep tracking the progress of a file. Oh. And at the end of this, let's print off whatever is in Dropbox shares and see what we got. So yay, all right. We got our file name assigned and our progress assigned. So that's great and all, but it didn't actually do anything on this main thing. Like we just went back to the main thing, and here's where you would expect to see all of the files that we're sharing and the files that we are getting shared to. So now we need to do that, but how do we do that? How do we put this new thing into this when we already know that we can't add new objects to a existing layout? And since this is the sort of thing that's only going to happen every once in a while, like how often are you adding a new file into this, we can destroy the window and rebuild the window. And every time we do that, it's gonna hopefully be fast enough that nobody notices. So let's think about how we want to do this. We got our main here where we're just doing this, but now we want to add in a whole bunch of other stuff because we want to get in a list of all of our shares and their progresses and all this stuff. We're also going to want to have buttons for canceling or removing those from our shared list, so we don't want to share that file anymore. So let's first build up okay. This is our shares, and this is our actions. Share names and share actions. All right. So now we want to iterate through for each share in our Dropbox shares. But we also want to know the index. Like when we have a list, we'll have an index of this is 0, this is 1, this is 2. We want to know that number, and we don't do that when we're iterating through with a for loop. We can, however, if we use an enumerate. This is basically like doing the same thing, except now it's getting us the values that we want, but it's also putting out an index before that. So that will be helpful. So now, for each share in our shares, we want to append to share names with a new list, because remember, everything's listed lists. We're basically going to make a new SG text here that's just going to be the share file name. And then we're going to add to our actions a list button that is going to have just an X. And remember how all of our buttons take whatever you give them as a name and make that the event? If you have like a whole bunch of X's, it's going to just make it X and then X0 and then X1 and stuff like that. And that's going to get confusing because X0 is actually referencing index 1. So let's avoid all the confusion here by giving this an explicit name, saying that the key for this is going to be remove, and I should make this F string, remove our index. So now it's going to be, when we push that button, we're going to get an event called remove underscore and whatever index it is inside the shares. And now we want to take those and put each of these into individual columns. So let's do that. Column share names equals SG column share names, and column share actions all right. So now you can probably guess where we're going with this. Now we need a panel or a pane to contain this. So pane shares is going to be equal to a list of lists, which includes SG pane, and here we give it our columns again in a list. So we got our column share names and then our column action names. And now, like I'm sounding out of breath because I'm explaining all this. Let's take a few seconds and look. That's just like 11 lines, right? So this isn't hard. It's just hard to talk about it while I'm doing it. Let's append that to the main layout. Since this is just a list, we just append this thing to it. So let's append pane shares, and this should work. Let's make sure I don't get any errors. I'd get an error. Did I put this in too many? Oh, okay, yeah, I put too many lists here. All right. Yay, all right. We don't have any errors, but this isn't actually doing anything yet. Like this is, you can see this little handle. So there's something here that's ready to do stuff when we have things in there, but we don't have anything in there. So if we go through and we add a file right now, we still don't have anything, even though the shares is printing out that it does have something in it. So we need to rebuild the whole UI to make use of our updated shares. So let's make a function that does that. We're just rebuild UI, and here we're going to have a new window, which is just SG window, and give it a name, and then a layout of create layout. And now let's take our old window and close it. So this new window is going to pop up above our old window, and we're just going to close it in the background. And then we're going to assign the new window to being the old window's place. And now we need to tell it to rebuild the UI. So instead of printing this, because we don't actually want to print it, we want to rebuild the UI and show it. Please work. Oh, fuck. All right, so both of these problems, and I was honestly only expecting one of them, but both of these problems are a state problem where when we start it, we get to the login. And when we add a file here and we tell it to rebuild the window, it's going back to the login because that's the first thing. Remember, we tell it to make all the other stuff invisible. So we can fix this by improving our state handling. Because once again, you see, we're getting that error here saying that this is trying to print to something that doesn't exist yet. So we can solve all these problems by changing our logic here to if the Dropbox state is equal to init, then we want it to change it to ready. that right? Oh, no. Okay, so if the state is init, then let's change it to login, okay? And we'll change our background logic here to only be doing this if this is in the login state, okay? So now we can come up to where we're saying, okay, we'll make these invisible and these visible. We can say, okay, well, if our Dripbox state is equal to login, well, then in that case, we definitely want to be able to see our login panel. Else, so if it's any other state than that, we actually want it to be going and showing us the main panel. So let's move our visible false up to the login. So it just skips the login part and goes right back to the main. And now let's change this so that when we hit the connect, let's change our Dripbox state to connected. All right. This should solve all the problems. Shit. I missed something. I guess we want this to be init. All right, yeah. All right, so now if we add a file here, and when we hit this confirm button, it's going to destroy the window, it's going to rebuild the UI, and we should see it work. It worked! Yay! Oh, thank God. All right, so we've got a kind of a mess, but it's a mess that we can work with, and it's a mess of the data that we're giving it. So we can add more things here. And now we've got even more of a mess and even more things. Let's use a different file here just to show that we can keep on adding more and more files, and they keep on showing up here. But let's try to clean this up now. The first thing that we need to do here is make this our shares pane here. Let's give this a relief flat. And you notice that the orientation was odd, where we've got the buttons underneath here. We don't want that, and we also don't want this handlebar here. So let's get rid of the handlebar by saying it's show handle false, and we'll change the orientation to be horizontal. And this should immediately clear things up. Yay! All right, so we got our file, and we got our X button, and our X button is giving us a remove _0 because 0 is the correct index for this file in our Dripbox.shares list here. So everything is working as intended. We haven't actually made the X do anything yet. But it's working. We can add more files in and they show up correctly. Because we're using these columns, it's lining everything up. Like you see, remember how when we put in just the online and the button, it's squished up right up against the online? Since we're using these columns here, it's keeping all of the buttons lined up nicely. We could try dicking around with the sizing of everything to make this a little bit prettier, but we're really not worrying about making this pretty right now. We just want to flesh it out. Don't spend a lot of time on prettying up your UI until you get to the end of your project, because any project will invariably have lots of changes to things. And if you're wasting time on the UI, most of that stuff is going to be redundant or necessary as you move on. So don't worry about how it's looking right now. We just want it to be basically functional. And making sure that it was in these columns is like one nod towards, well, we want it to be functional and not confusing. Because in the future, we're probably going to want to have all of our data in columns. It might not look like this in the end, but it's probably going to be in columns. So, okay, we've got this working now. We've got our share working. We'll worry about making the X thing disappear, or actually remove things in the next video. But we've got a problem here, right? Is I close that and I relaunch it. It doesn't save any of this. We have no persistence. So that's what we're going to address in the next video. We're going to have a little database that's going to keep track of all of the things like our password and all the files that we want to be sharing and the files we want to be grabbing from other computers and a whole bunch of other useful data. So look forward to that in the next video. Thank you very much to my one patron, Ben Ford, for his continued support. Take it easy, folks.